going to sound like these two things don't have anything to do with each other, but I'm going to read two passages before I ever say anything about either one of them. First one is in Mark chapter 5. No, Mark chapter 4. Wrong page. Mark chapter 4, starting with verse 35. And the same day, when the evening was come, he saith unto them, Let us pass over unto the other side. And when they had sent away the multitude, they took him even as he was in the ship. And there were also with him other little ships. And there arose a great storm of wind, and the waves beat into the ship, so that it was now full. And he was in the hinder part of the ship, asleep on a pillow. And they awake him, and say unto him, Master, carest thou not that we perish? And he arose and rebuked the wind, and said unto the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said unto them, Why are ye so fearful? How is it that ye have no faith? And they feared exceedingly, and said one to another, What manner of man is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? Now go over to Luke chapter 10, starting with verse 38. Now it came to pass, as they went, that he entered into a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha received him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, which also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. But Martha was cumbered about much serving, and came to him and said, Lord, dost thou not care that my sister has left me alone to serve? Be it her therefore that she help me. And Jesus answered and said unto her, Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things. But one thing is needful, and Mary has chosen that good part, which shall not be taken away from her. Those two passages, if you just kind of read them on the outset, they don't seem to have anything to do with one another. Yet they do have a lot to do with one another. What we want to look at today is a little bit about why sometimes we get mixed up on what Jesus really cares about. We have our ideas of what we think Jesus needs to be concerned about, which may or may not be the same things that he thinks he needs to be concerned about. The first passage I read was about, of course, we've all heard this preached 27 different ways throughout our lifetime about this storm in the sea. But what I want to look at is the rebuking in both of those. The storm on the sea, and also when Martha was upset about her sister not helping her. Jesus rebuked the people both times, not because of the circumstances, but because of their attitudes. Both times that he was confronted, both times it was about an earthly thing that they were concerned about. He didn't rebuke them because of the circumstances. He rebuked them because of their attitude about the circumstances. What we need to sometimes we lose sight of is Jesus didn't come to fix your problems. He came to fix you. He's not necessarily concerned about your circumstances. Amen. He may or may not deliver you from your circumstances. Now, when they were crossing that sea, if you go on to the next chapter, of course, and we all pretty much know that he crossed that sea in order to free that man that was in chains, that wild man that nobody could tame, and he went and delivered him. Now, that was a different, he delivered that man's circumstance because the circumstance had to do with the man. The storm in the sea had nothing to do with the people in the boat. Because I've preached this before, and I'm sure you've heard it preached before. When I first started reading, one of the first verses I read said, where Jesus said, Let us pass over to the other side. Well, he had already said they were going to go to the other side. So there wasn't really anything to worry about. Because once Jesus had said, we're going to the other side, you're going to get to the other side. Amen. They wasn't going to crash in that, The thing that I've always thought was really interesting about that story is if Jesus if he is asleep in the boat, there's probably not anything to worry about. You don't need to go, we don't need to go wake Jesus up and tell him about our problem. He knows what your problem is. And he got mad. You can kind of tell reading, he got a little perturbed when they got him up. He was tired. Because it said, when I read that, if you really look how it reads, it says they took him as he was into the ship. He'd been teaching, healing, doing stuff all day long. And he was human just like we are. He was tired. He wanted to go to sleep. He was sleeping, apparently was sleeping pretty good. He had a pillow. He had everything he needed. Storm didn't affect him in the least. And they go shake him, wake him up. You not care we're all fixing to die? So what's it? He gets up, takes care of the storm, just to appease them, really. Because the storm wasn't the problem to start with. The problem was them. Then he turns to them and says, where's your faith at? Did you not have any, and what he's kind of saying is, did you not have any faith in what I already said earlier? That we were going to the other side? He rebuked them because of their attitude toward the circumstance they were involved in. And then Martha's the same way. Mary is worshiping Jesus. Martha's doing what you should do. She's taking care of her guests. She's got people in her house. You know, I think, some of the culture is a little different nowadays, but as I was growing up, and most of you women that's in here would know, if you got somebody in your house, you're going to take care of those people. My mama used to want to feed everybody. If you come to mama's house, she wanted you to eat. She wanted the house to look like something. She wanted everything to be put in its place and all those kind of things. That's what she was interested in. So she comes to Jesus and she says, look, I'm working myself to death here to try to make this house presentable and to try to get you all something to eat and drink. Mary's just sitting over here doing nothing. Can't you make her help me? Well, then Jesus rebukes Martha, not Mary. He rebukes Martha because of her attitude toward the situation. He praises Mary because of her worship. And it says that that's more needful than the things that Martha was doing. Not that the things that Martha was doing were unnecessary, but there's something more needful than what's going on in the kitchen. What's going on out here where I'm at is more needful than what's going on in there in the kitchen. It's kind of like I had an aunt one time that, y'all probably heard me say this when they have association, Mountain Union Association, and where all the churches gather together once a year and they have that big meal and all that stuff. And Mama was growing up and my grandfather's sister, she knew who Jesus was, let's just say that, and knew him from the time she was 10 years old till she died. And if you were in her presence more than 2 minutes, you'd know who Jesus was too. That kind of woman, Well, they're sitting at the table trying to get everything, getting the potluck out and all that. And Mama's little, she's hungry. And my aunt is going around, she's shouting and praising God and everything. And my mama said, I remember pulling up my mama's dress and saying, Mama, I'm hungry, let's go eat. And she always would say, let's wait for Hattie. We ain't gonna eat till Hattie gets here. Mama says, she ain't gonna get here. And so Mama went to Aunt Hattie and tugged on her dress and said, Aunt Hattie, I'm hungry. Mama won't eat. Mom and Daddy won't eat till you get over there. And Mama said, she said, I never will forget. She looked down at me and she said, honey, I'm feasting on the Lord's table right now. I don't need nothing else.
Amen.
Mama said, but I did. Well, see, that's kind of what Mary's feasting at the Lord's table. Martha's concerned about the potluck. We get everything all mixed up sometimes. We want God to fix the problem when maybe he's not interested in what the problem is. He's interested in where you're at in the problem. We all know, we've heard it preached and read all along that the whole time Jesus walked and the whole time he proclaimed the kingdom, that they all wanted him to fix their problem with the Roman government. They wanted him to fix the kingdom here. Jesus was never, ever concerned about the fact that the Romans ruled Israel. He never even really addressed that that it has even been an issue, that the Romans were in charge of Jerusalem. He was always interested in the people. He was interested in the attitude of his people. He was interested in the souls of his people. He was not interested in the circumstances of an earthly kingdom. And he tried to tell them that. They never could figure it out. Never figured it out until after he had died and rose again. Still, I think some of them thought that even after he rose again, he was still going to fix that earthly kingdom. But he's interested in you. He's not interested in what's going on around you. He's not really interested in the problems that you've got. You know, and say, well, that don't sound right. He is interested in my problems. Well, he's interested in your problems so far as how they are affecting your soul. If God fixes you, you still got the same job you had before. But it may be a little easier to deal with. If God fixes you, those same people who didn't like you before, they're still not going to like you now. But they're going to be easier to deal with. God may not fix your marriage, but if he fixes you, the marriage will get better. You know, I don't care what the situation is. If God fixes you, the situation gets more tolerable. Sometimes if God fixes you, that does fix the situation. But it's not that God fixed the situation, he fixed you. You know, if God will just take care of this problem for me, then I'll do what he wants me to do. You know, I'm not one to say what God will or will not do, but as far as my own personal opinion goes, I've always thought if you come to him with that attitude, he's going to say, well, I need to fix the problem for you. I'm not interested in fixing your problem until you get interested in finding out who I am. If I'm only here to give you presents at Christmas, then you don't need me anyway. If I'm only here to make sure that you get from point A to point B without something happening to you, if I'm only here to make sure that you've got enough money, if I'm only here to make sure that you survive this or survive that, then we're on the wrong foot anyway. We're already on the wrong foot. You got to get to the point where you want Jesus despite, not because of. You want Jesus despite your circumstances, not because of your circumstances. You want to let him fix you in the middle of your problem. You know, he may deliver you from something, he may not. You know, we argue that point all the time from the pulpit and everywhere else. You know, God, sometimes he does and sometimes he don't. And all we can say is, you know, we're guaranteed certain things from the cross. We're guaranteed those things in the book of Isaiah. But sometimes God don't fix your problem. But he'll fix you if you'll let him. 90% of your problem will go away when you get fixed. It's like that, and I already had all this together before I ever watched that Billy Graham show this morning where Franklin was talking to those guys overseas that had been persecuted and thrown in prison and beaten and everything else for preaching the gospel. And you know, the one guy told him, he said, I was in prison and I was getting beat every day. And he said, every day I got beat, my hate got bigger. Bigger today, bigger tomorrow, bigger the next day. And he said, I finally came to God and said, look, all I have is you and this hate. And he said, I can't die with this hate. He said, I prayed for God to give me the love of Jesus toward my enemies. And he said, he granted me that. And he said, the beatings got more tolerable. They didn't hurt as bad when I loved the ones who were beating me. I returned love to them for the evil they were giving me, which is what the Bible tells us to do. Return good for evil. What the devil meant for evil, God used for good. And, you know, he didn't get out of prison right away and all that. He's out now, but the beatings didn't stop. persecution didn't stop. But you know, you read in the Bible, when they stoned Stephen, what's it say about Stephen? That he laid down and went to sleep. When he said, lay this charge not upon them, God allowed him to go to sleep. I don't think he felt those rocks. One thing you got to understand, if you want to get God's attention, put yourself in a position to love somebody else, despite what they do. When Stephen was fixing to be stoned, if you were, and I didn't read that, but when he was fixing to be stoned, the Bible says that Jesus stood up at the right hand of God. Jesus is seated at the right hand of God. If you really want to know Jesus, put yourself in a position for him to stand up. He stood up when they stoned Stephen because Stephen had the right attitude. It didn't have anything to do with his circumstance. And yes, he did die. But you know what? We all know where he's at right now. And that death means nothing to him now. Those stones mean nothing to him. God allowed him to go to sleep during that. The thing about it is, we're more interested in what's happening today. We're more interested in where we're going to be tomorrow. Is this going to be hard on me? Am I going to be able to do this? I'm worried about this. I'm worried about that. You know, we lose sight. We only want Jesus when things are bad. He will not. I firmly believe he will not take every situation from you because you would get to the point where you didn't think you needed him at all. And if you never need him, you won't have him. That's just the way it is. We are a species that's fallen from grace. And given the opportunity on our own, we will remain away from that grace. The grace of God comes when situations are not perfect. Your life is not perfect, despite how good or bad it is. It's not perfect. It wasn't perfect yesterday, and guess what? It ain't going to be perfect tomorrow. It's not going to be perfect the day they lay you in God's funeral home. It's going to be perfect when you pass through the gate. Until that point, you're going to need God. He's going to see to it that you need him. Because if you get to the point where you don't need him, you won't want him. So he may not, when we say, well, God didn't do that for me. God didn't do this for me. I've heard this other preacher tell me that if I'll follow God, I'll become a millionaire, I'll have a new car, everything will be wonderful, everything's going to be glorious and all that kind of stuff. God never, ever said that. Never said that. He said, if you follow me, you will be persecuted. That's what he said. Yes, there are blessings. There is prosperity. Abraham was a rich man. David was a rich man. Solomon was a rich man. A lot of people have been rich and followed God. But there's people dying overseas every day for God who ain't got a place to sleep. But they're laying their life down without recanting who he is. Now, I've always believed if you can have $1 million and still put God first, God has no problem with you having $1 million. But you know what he knows? More than you. That's the first thing. He knows more than you. And if he knows that $1 million will separate you from him, guess what? You're not ever going to have $1 million. If he knows there's anything that you desire that will separate you from him, I don't care how bad you want it. He ain't giving it to you. Because he's going to keep you where he needs you. and where you need him. You've been called to do something. He wants you to find out what that is. You know, the thing about it is, here's the whole kicker to the whole thing. You're not good for nothing. You ain't good for anything. That's just the way, you're not good for nothing. But you were made for something. In and of yourself, you're nothing but a fallen from grace sinner on your way to hell. You're good for nothing. But you were made for something. You know, that famous verse that all the pro-life people like to quote, before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee, and before thou camest forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee, and I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations. Those are true words. That's Jeremiah's calling. But the thing about it is, he ordained you to be something too. But he ordained it. You didn't choose it. You didn't pick it. You were born for it. It's hard to get that point across to people. But you were born, we don't understand how, the hows, whys of everything, but you were born when you were born for a purpose. You were born where you were born for a purpose. You were born to the family you were born to for a purpose. None of that was just happenstance. You have a calling and you have a purpose. And it has nothing to do with how bad your day went today. It has nothing to do with the circumstances. It had nothing to do with so-and-so said this and it hurt my feelings. So now I'm going to get on Facebook and I'm going to blast everybody. It ain't got nothing to do with none of that. Your circumstances make you who you are. God makes you who he wants you to be. You know, there's a saying about character is what you are when nobody's looking. You know, we project ourselves to people. And most of the time, you got a pretty good idea who somebody is. You know, pretty fair, good idea. But we project ourselves to people in a way we want them to perceive us. But who you are when nobody's around is who God knows you to be. And if you're only interested in him fixing your problem instead of fixing you, then you're not interested. He's never, ever promised us that life is going to be glorious. He never told us that. Life is glorious when he's in it, no matter what. No matter what. You know, it's like I've said before, when my parents died, my parents died. You know, those of you who had your parents die, you know what that feels like. My parents died. But I stood over the casket with a smile because I knew. Y'all know what I'm talking about. I knew. There was nothing to be concerned about. The circumstances were not good, but the joy was evident. It's not always peaches and cream, and you can't have roses without thorns. Ain't nobody ever picked a rose that didn't get stuck. Blackberries are good, but they tear your hands all to pieces trying to get them off the vine. Circumstances surrounding the blackberries are not good, but the blackberries are. But you got to go through the circumstance to get the reward. God may not deliver you out of the circumstance, but he will deliver you through the circumstance. where it says that, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, that's a true statement. We've heard that preached before. It doesn't say anything about stopping in the shadow of death. You gotta walk through the valley. You know, and something else it don't say, you know, we look at, it don't say he carried him through the valley of the shadow of death either. It says he walked through it. But God was with him as he walked through it. There is bad times, but they're not as bad when God's in them. When we lose sight of who he is more than just a big Santa Claus somewhere to give us what we ask for, we don't even know who he is. If that's what you think he is, you don't know who he is. And if that's your idea of salvation, then I'm going to say, I'm just wondering how much salvation you actually got. Because if you have the salvation of Jesus Christ, you understand what it cost him to give it to you. And just because every day's not peachy keen doesn't mean that you give up on him. Because I don't care what is going on in your life, it's not as bad as what he went through. It's not cost you what it cost him. And what I always like is where it talks about that he went through the suffering of the cross for the joy that was set before him. There is always joy when it's got something to do with God. You do have a purpose. Don't just exist day to day. I told a boy that one time. I had one of my customers at the car lot. He was a young boy. He was he was typical of a lot of my customers. He had been on drugs. He draws a check. He didn't work. Young guy, wasn't nothing wrong with him other than he didn't want to work. And he just kind of went along, through life. And I pinned him down one day. I helped him out. He got in trouble, and I helped him out. And I said, okay, I've helped you. I said, now you need to sit down and listen to me for a minute. I said, you owe me that much. He was just 18. Hadn't really been raised. And I said, you need to find out your purpose. He said, what do you mean? I said, you just exist day to day. I said, you just live, today, well, whatever, tomorrow, whatever. I said, you have no purpose, you have no foundation, you have no structure. I said, don't exist day to day. Live. Live. Get yourself some structure. And I did make him mad because I said he was fussing because they'd cut his check. I said, you need to forget that check and get you a job. That's what you need to do. Well, he got mad at me then. But anyway, he got over it. And that was later on when he wasn't no longer a customer of mine. He come back and he said, I just wanted to come back and tell you. I said, what? He said, I got me a job. He's got a little girl now. And him and the mother's not married and things are not ideal, but he sees life in a different way and he's making progress. I'm not going to say it's because of the talk I had with him, but it does have something to do with he's got a little structure now. Structure your life around God and it'll be okay. Whatever comes will also pass. But you got to go through it sometimes. You do have a calling and you do have a purpose. Figure out what that is. And you can't figure it out. You got to ask him what it is. Let him tell you what it is. We've all got something to do. Thatcher was born with a purpose. Lathan was born with a purpose. Chloe has been born with a purpose. Even though Betty was born with a purpose. You know what I always said? Apparently Betty's purpose is not done yet because she's still sitting here and she's still breathing. Once God's purpose in you is fulfilled, he takes you home. As long as you're breathing, as long as you got a heartbeat, You got work to do for God. That's my message for today.